Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to Just Bloom with Kiki Orr.
I am always so grateful when I have such amazing women to sit down and have conversations with, and this episode would be no different. Episode number 9. And I am joined by a wonderful guest, Sallomazing Hralima. And if I said the last name incorrectly, she will say it again and do it more justice because it is her name, and she owns it and wears it well. One of the things I want to say as I get started is that what I know of Sallome is that she has been always a woman of service. When I sat down to prepare for this particular conversation, I did so with in mind that we'd be talking about a particular topic, and that is after. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and what it means and how it got started. I thought that in thinking of Kobe Bryant and all of the passengers that were lost, but also in Sallome's own life that she's experienced tragic, that I wanted to be able to share some healing with folks that may be experiencing loss or have experienced loss themselves, and then what that gets to look like for them while they're going through it and how to get to prepare for what we know would be the inevitable. And then I said, I speak to these amazing and dynamic women, and what I got really clear on is all of the work that she has done prior, all of the work that she's doing current, and all of the work that she will do going forward. And I want to honor that. I want to honor that because we as women get to reinvent ourselves, if you will. We as women get to continually step into our creative endeavors. And sometimes we find that challenging when we're working our traditional 9-to-5 job. So I figured that's the way I wanted this conversation to go. I want to honor her and all that she has done, is doing, and will do. So we'll start from the past, we'll look at the current, and then we'll focus on the future. So without further ado, please welcome my guest, Sallome. Say hello to the beautiful people.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you so much for allowing me to be in this conversation with you. It is truly a pleasure, especially after listening to so many of your other podcasts and getting an opportunity to hear about some of the other women's journeys that have been in this conversation with you. So it's a real pleasure.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you being here. I'm grateful for that. And so please tell the people your name. And then when you tell them your name, I also want to know what it means. How did you get to have your name, and what does it mean? Obviously, your parents name you, but what does it mean? Or maybe not obviously your parents. Somebody else could have named you.
Well, it's Sallome Hralima, and Sallome is a very popular name in East Africa and in Brazil. And then there's a very famous author who wrote, Julia Alvarez, I think is her name, who wrote In the Name of Sallome and In the Time of Butterflies. So there's a novella with my name. There's an opera with my name. In the Bible, she's the reason that King Herod, John the Baptist's head is chopped off. That's my name. And my last name, my father was in the military and changed his name. And so my last name is a name that my father changed his name to, as so many Black Americans did in the 70s and 80s, and Hralima means gentle, but he added a extra letter in there, which is the letter that gives everyone complications, which is the R. But if you put both my first and last name together, it means peace, gentle.
Beautiful. And peaceful and gentle you are. I remember our first encounter together, while brief, and that's what I want to talk about. I want to go a little bit into the past. So while brief, the first time we got to connect was during the Jinami Empowerment Project with Akuya, and you served as the program chair, and there was a chance for my daughter, then who was a teenager, to get, and we kind of co-chaired a group and did a workshop for the Sister to Sister Youth Summit. So that was exciting times. And so I want to talk about the work that you've done previously with Gina Ma, and also the Future Project, because as I said at the top of the conversation, you've always been, or maybe, I'm making an assumption here, that you've always been a woman of service. Is that a safe assumption to make? Or if not, what were you doing prior to? Okay, so tell me more.
Sure.
Tell me more.
For sure. So I guess it really actually starts with my mom. My mother was a community leader. She loved to entertain, and so our home was always the home that meetings were held. So we would have NAACP meetings and planning for fundraisers and planning for parades. Always happened in our house. I've always been used to having community over, always working towards some goal. And then I went into education out of college and was teaching. That led to wanting to start a nonprofit in Brooklyn. It was called the Reconstruction Period. And what we were attempting to do was have these young Brooklyn youth who wanted to get out of Brooklyn, quite frankly. They felt that they were stifled being here and living here in substandard circumstances. And I was a transplant from California, and everywhere I lived in Brooklyn was where culture was being created, or people were coming from all over the world to learn how to bring this authentic, say, like Pan-African experience to other parts of the world. And I'm like, why would you leave a place that everyone is copying from? So we were committed to creating programming here that showed young people just how extraordinary their own borough was. From there, I was doing some work at Landmark Education, and while I was there, I met a guy who told me that he was a life coach for teens. And I'm like, well, where do you do that? And he's like, the Upper East Side. And I was like, the Upper East Side? Well, we need life coaches in Brooklyn. And so it was from that conversation that I got this idea that we should have life coaches in public high schools. And I made it my mission, that was maybe in about 2007, my mission to do what I could to provide life coaches for public high school students. And that's how I wound up at the Future Project. The work with Jinyami Empowerment Project, I was on the board. And Akuya wanted to do work with individuals and then have those individuals be able to bring similar work to their families and then have those families bring similar work to community. And I was really in love with her mission and the strategy she had to bring about change in our communities. And so wanted to support that work. And because I had done so much programming in the past, brought that to the Sister to Sister Youth Summit. So, yeah, this trajectory has been a long one from childhood, being of service, even though I have done a true about-face in terms of my career in the last 6 to 8 months. My heart is in giving back. It's in making people, places, and experiences better for people.
It's beautiful. So as you said, you've always been doing this work, and it sounded like you were definitely born into it, because it's hard, not hard, I should say. Well, hard in the sense that to be, what I was going to say is when you're surrounded by parents who are heavily involved in the community and doing community work, it's hard to ignore, is what I was going to say, to ignore that and when you're seeing it occur on a day-to-day basis, even though, some of us can, because you hear about all the time that people who are parents who may have been doctors or lawyers or had whatever career path and then wanted their children to follow in the steps. And they're like, nah, I'm not going to do that. That's not the journey that I want to take. But that wasn't the case. That wasn't the case for you. And so when I think about that, and we're talking, so you mentioned your dad being in the military, and you mentioned the influence of your mom and the work that she was also doing in planning and being community driven, and they imparted that seemingly in you. I did want to talk about after, and I wasn't even sure how this transition would even occur, but because we're talking about your parents, I want to talk about that. So tell tell me a little bit about, before I even get into that, tell me a little bit about your mom and your dad, and there are many of us who get to grow up with both parents in the household, and there are quite a number of us that don't or haven't. And so what was that like for you to be able to be having both parents with you and raising you, and what was your childhood like growing up?
Wow. Well, this is a interesting story because I didn't grow up with both of my parents, actually. My parents divorced when I was very young, and my father had a whole life outside of my mom and my brother and I. And when I would turn, maybe when I was around 24, 25, well, when I was in college, I had discovered or was told that my father had been incarcerated. So I really didn't have much communication with him at all at that point. I mean, I had very little before that, but then it pretty much stopped. And after taking a course where I just realized how much of who I am is from him, I did so much living at that point without him. I wanted an opportunity to just talk to him as an adult. And I went to visit him in prison, and my mom joined me. He was in Las Vegas Correctional Facility, or no, not Las Vegas, somewhere in Reno, in Nevada. And I went to visit. My mom joined me because I was driving from California, and it was in that visit that my mom saw him for the first time in a very long time. And my brother has been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and at that time my mom was pretty much the sole, everything for him. She was the one that was attempting to make sure he was on his medication, and when he would disappear for long stretches of time was the one worrying. And so she wanted to share that with my father, and I gave them time alone to speak on what she was dealing with him. And when we left that visit, somewhere between 2004 and 2005, they began corresponding. I had no idea that they were corresponding. Fast forward, I don't know how many years, maybe 30, somewhere around 30, 32 years old, my mom tells me that they are together. I'm like, how are you with this man who is incarcerated? And I was not having it. I mean, I put my mom through the ringer. Let me tell you, we had a lot of difficult conversations. And when I married in 2005, my father got out of prison, and they remarried. From 1988 to 2005, they weren't together, and here they are. They got remarried. They built a home together in Las Vegas. My mom retired early. I was not for that. I was like, how are you going to retire? What is happening? I didn't have two parents in the household. I really was raised by my mom, and my father was really an absent dad. There were no birthday cards. There were no. I may have seen him maybe 5 times between 8 and 21. But my mother she appeared to be happy about the decision that she made to remarry my father. And so I had 2 children. I spoke to my mom almost every day after having my children and on FaceTime. So I would see my dad on my first child's first birthday. My husband and I, we flew to Vegas and spent time with the 2 of them. And that was like the first Christmas I think I'd ever spent that I could personally remember with my father. And so there was a lot more of seeing him after my parents remarried, and he got out of prison. But that lasted, I guess, it was maybe 2.5, almost 3 years before they died.
Wow. I had no idea, because of what I was going to get to was the part about their passing, their untimely passing. But before getting there, I do have another question to ask. What was that like for you in terms of the healing? Because you talked about, your mom and that the challenge and you putting her through the ringer. But what was it like, or did you begin to have some healing with your dad, or, conversations with your dad and around his, obviously he was in prison, but like, what was the effect that it had on you, and did you talk to him about that at all, or like what was the relationship like once he got out of prison?
It was very, how do I say, up until, I don't think that I was, this is really interesting. I hadn't actually forgiven my father for the life that my mom lived before remarrying him. And because their relationship, I shared that my father was in the military and it changed his name. What I didn't say is that he was married at the time. So he was married to a woman, a Japanese woman. He met her in Japan. My father spoke 5 languages fluently. She was in Massachusetts when he met my mother in California. And so he married my mother under this new name, but he was still married to his first wife and had a child. So he had his first wife and child, he just disappeared. He just abandoned them, and then did the exact same thing to my mother. And so, and in doing that, had lied about his entire life. Everything from his name to where he was born. My birth certificate says my father is from England. My dad is from Louisiana. It was a world of deception. And it didn't stop after when my father was incarcerated. He had 2 different women believing that he was going to come home to them. It was just, and so for me, my mother being with my father, it was really this, I felt like my mother didn't have a lot of self-esteem. I felt like she was settling. I felt like she had been alone for so long that she would take whomsoever. It was like she just didn't want to die alone. She didn't want to go into old age alone. And my father, because he was retired military and post office, he did well. When he got out of prison, they had 2 cars, a convertible and a Prius. They were looking forward after my father was off parole or probation or whatever the case was. They were planning to travel. They were about to go around the world. So financially, it was okay for my mom to leave her job, and she was happy that she could come to New York whenever to see her grandchildren and help my husband and I, and that she could stay at home and drive her new convertible. I think the life that my father afforded her, she was willing to trade all kinds of emotional support and well-being for that, and so even up until their untimely deaths, I honestly believed that my father would be my father was incarcerated because he attempted to murder his girlfriend at the time. And so I was afraid for my mother's life and told her so. I told her brother, I told my dad's family. I was like, you all are going to sit by, and I was the only adult telling them that this was not a good idea, right? And I got a lot of pushback from my family. They're like, these are 2 grown people. You don't need to be in their business. And a lot of people were like, I don't see why you're not just happy for them. I'm like, because I know their whole story. That's why I'm happy about this. But I knew that there was no talking my mom out of it. I tried and I'd failed. And so I had just basically, I just was attempting to be supportive of her and attempting to be available to her, but she did not tell me what was happening in her life. With her, in her relationship with my father, there was no conversation about that whatsoever. And so it isn't until after my parents passed that I got a real look into their lives as a married couple. And that, that's, speaking of passing. So my parents passed May 20th, 2018. I had a baby 2 months prior, and they were in a car accident, and they so many things that you when you look back, you're like, wow, there's so much. If my mom had just been sharing with me, I feel, I was like, wow, not that I could have prevented this from happening because they died in a car accident, but there's so many things about her life that I think would have been different. And so when they had passed, they were in a rental car, going from Las Vegas to Reno, and they were and it's like, why are you two in a rental car when you have two cars? Well, my father had been in multiple accidents before this happened, but my mom hadn't told any of us that, right? And so after them passing, they had just got paperwork, I think maybe the day before or 2 days prior, that he had Parkinson's. I mean, I had no idea my dad had diabetes. There was like all this medical, all of this aging stuff that was happening with them that they hadn't shared, and they had been to an attorney to talk about setting up a trust, but they hadn't finished. When they passed, they had just built this house in Las Vegas, and then we discover that there was a young woman who had grown up with him as her father. Like, we all knew that he had helped raise her and everything, but when we got in the house and started looking for paperwork, he's on our birth certificate. We're like, wait, what? So, like, it's a whole life. There's all, his whole life. We went to a storage unit that he'd had, and got a chance to see, all this whole life. And, when someone passes, then there's no conversation about any of that. You're sort of just left with puzzle pieces that sometimes fit together, sometimes don't,
Right.
Yeah, so it was a...
That's a lot. That's a lot to unpack, a lot to discover, right? A lot to discover, uncover, unpack. I'm like, this is. My mom watches Lifetime a lot, right? And I'm like, this is a Lifetime movie in and of itself. But except it's not. It's your real life, but it could very well be a Lifetime movie story. But as you were sharing, so many things came up for me. There's a couple of things that I think would be the perfect segue into After, right? That's one. But before that, just a reminder to me of how, the saying, we're as sick as our secrets, but also how our secrets can have can have an effect on our family. And granted, your parents are adults and they don't owe any explanation to anyone in terms of the life that they live or led, I should say. But the thing to kind of note, and you'll talk about this kind of in the After, is what happened after. Because one thing that we know for certain, right, and two things we know for sure, we born and we die, right? And we don't know when. And then we have the people that we leave behind, and what does that look like? Because you made mention of a home, and they didn't have a trust and all of that. And so that kind of goes into where you and I got to connect again. And I don't know, was that 2018 when you did the After meeting, or was that early 2019?
The first After session we did was actually in November of 2018, but then I think you joined us in the beginning of 2019.
Yeah. So I joined Sallome, and also partner, when I say partner, a partner in business, Divine, at the creation of After. And I want you to be able to share with people, how After came to be created, and, the premise, the impetus for that. But also then I want to share with the people how profound it was for me, and what I got from it. And I think how important how important and necessary this conversation is, just as I am actually planning my 48th birthday, right? I'm planning my birthday, and not every time, but when I'm planning the birthday, I think about kind of the After, and I go, wow, we plan birthdays, we plan celebrations, we plan all of these things, but how many of us actually plan for the moment that we're not here, and what does that get to look like? So, so with that being said, if you can, share about the after and kind of in relation to your parents and all of that?
Absolutely. So I was working at the Future Project when my parents passed, and I was on maternity leave. So I said, I had a 2-month-old when my parents passed. I was supposed to go back to work in August and followed my maternity leave with sabbatical. And so when I got back in November to work, one of my colleagues, the Future Project had a sister company called the Future Company, and they had a number of people building projects around new ideas, building companies, businesses around new ideas. And one of those ideas was After by Divine Bradley. And he had an experience. He's a extremely creative, just force of nature. And he'd had a battling depression, and he was thinking about, well, what would happen if I died? And in this one evening, because this is just who he is, he pulls out Post-it notes and he starts writing down, what he would want to happen with his media. And he's an avid polo collector, so like, what happens with my polo? What happens with my children? Like, who outside of their parents, like their moms, like who takes care of my kids? And he started like looking at his life through Post-its, and he's like, who helps people to plan for their death? And it sparked something in him, because really he's a lover of life. And so it gave him a new way to look at his life. And he wanted that for other people. He wanted people to be able to, a lot of people, you die. It's like someone close to you dies, and then you look at life differently, or you have a near-death experience, and then you come to life differently. He wanted people to have to avoid that step. He wanted you to be able to have a question posed, or to have an experience workshop that would have you start really thinking differently about your life. And when he shared this with me, he shared it with me because he knew I just lost my parents, and he's like, listen, I want to talk to you about what this experience has been like for you. And it was because I was in the throes of it. I was in the throes of what happens with my parents were both cremated. Like, what do you plan to do with their ashes, and what happens with their house, and how do you have to, what are all the things you're now dealing with? I was able to share those with him sort of as a singular focus group. And because I have all this experience with programming, I started to think with him about what would a program look like where we can take people through this process, who matters to you, and what do you want to leave behind, and what kind of celebratory experience do you want to have, when that day comes. And so we started doing this work, and then another member of our team, Joseph Wisegold, joined us, who's trained as an industrial designer. And through his design background, we were able to create materials to go with this journey. And the three of us basically started creating these programs, fine-tuning what we were calling After School, and having people join us in a conversation about what do we want to happen in death, and how might that change how we're living our lives. Honestly, one of the most cathartic things I'd ever been through. I have to also add that moments after I was told that my parents died in a car accident, I posted on IG. It was because it was late at night, and I knew that when I heard that my parents passed, and I knew that things were about to move very quickly, I wanted to share it and then leave it so that I could just be in whatever needed to be handled. And so but one of the responses I got from a college classmate was that he's like, one of our college classmates is a death doula. As I was going through this process with my sister and my aunts and everything, trying to manage my parents' estate, I had a death doula who was walking me. It's through her company is called Going with Grace, and Elua Arthur basically held my sister in my hand through that process. And similar to when I heard that there was a life coach for teens and me saying, every child deserves a life coach for teens. I'm like, everybody needs a death doula. And I learned that, that in Alua's practice, there's 3 things that she basically has helped families with. One is, there's some families who just got married or you just had a child and you're like, I need to get serious about life insurance and all of that stuff. So she helps people to just plan because they're looking ahead, right? And then there's some people who are they're not well. Someone in their life is terminal, and so she helps families figure out like where am I going to go? Am I going to stay home? Am I going to go to hospice? Am I going to go right? Like how when you're in the throes of thinking about death because it's at your door. She helps families in that moment. And then with us, there's this third category, which is you've lost someone and you don't know what to do. There's so many things that need to get handled, and you don't realize it until someone does die. And then she was there to help us make phone calls and to check on us emotionally. And so those are 3 different times where people do reach out to a death doula. And so for me, I'm sitting with Joseph and Divine, and I'm thinking so much about what Alua provided us. It changed me, and I started thinking about the many, many, many people. You brought up Kobe Bryant and his family, but there's so many people for whom death is so sudden. And, outside of there's so much emotional trauma that comes with that, but then there's so much administrative work that has to happen. And people don't get to grieve because they're handling all these things, and there's so many questions that you don't have answers for regarding what the person who now passed would have wanted, right? And I mean, it's just there's a whole world in this, but
I'm glad you said that, and I know that we can talk. We can probably this could be like 3 episodes long about this, but I'm glad you said that, because one of the things in terms of tragic, there are many of us who have not many, but there are many people I should say who may have lost someone tragically, and so didn't get to plan for it because we didn't know that it was going to occur, it has me think about what me to after my godson had committed suicide, and then most recently my sister best friend, it's like a cousin family member, 44 years old, passed away, mother of 7 suddenly. I remember thinking that, so my sister's in pain and she's crying and she's feeling her feelings, and then the funeral, the arrangements, like everything was so fast. And I remember sitting thinking, oh my gosh, I feel like this gets to be different. Like, I don't know how it gets to be different, but like in terms of really allowing people the space to be able to have their moment of grief. And obviously grief is not going to just happen one time, right? But like immediately when someone passes, and then we go right into, let's plan the funeral. What about this? What about that? It's like, oh my goodness. And so I started to, and that's one of the kind of the premise of the conversation. I was like, I need to, talk to Sallome. I want to talk about like what that gets to look like, and perhaps begin to implant in people maybe the possibility of what they get to create for themselves. And I don't know what that, I have no idea what I'm talking about, right? I really don't even have any idea what that even looks like, but I just know in my spirit that it gets to be different. I think about when it's my time and my children, I'm like, I want them to have a moment, a couple of days, a week maybe, I don't know, but just to be, if you will, right? To be and to kind of honor, to sit with, and not to get to be so distracted by all that has to quote unquote get done, that they don't get an opportunity. And obviously they'll have a lifetime of grieving afterwards, but I think that those moments, those initial moments are so kind of crucial, if you will. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Well, ultimately, this experience, I mean, again, though my parents weren't young, and we found out all my father's illnesses after the fact, my mom definitely had a lot more living to do. And so my aunt, her sisters, my father's siblings, that I went on a crusade. Let me tell you, at their memorial service, I went to every OG in the room. I'm like, are your affairs in order? Are your affairs in order? I mean, and people are like, I don't know if this is the right time. I'm like, right time? Right time. You're getting in the car when you leave here, right? And so one of my aunts, she and her husband, they own property. I mean, like they have art. They both retired. They're very accomplished people, and they got to it immediately. And within months, she called. She's like, it's all done. And she was like, I have a favor to ask. Are you willing to serve as executor of my estate if my husband is, for whatever reason, either goes before me or experiences what your parents did, which is going at the same time? And I was so humbled by the request. But I knew from my own experience that you want someone that you love, that you trust, to be able to wade through your paperwork and your documentation, who might be saddened by your loss but aren't crippled by it. Whereby your children, like you just said, are going to need time and space. And if they know Sallome's got it, she's going to tell us what there is for us to do, if there's anything for us to do at this time, then I know it set my aunt at ease. And similarly, her husband had somebody for him as well. And so my mom's sister immediately went out, she's like, I don't have much, but I got my will and all my things, And so, it had at least those who were that close to my parents, it got them to get their affairs in order, right? Now, for my husband and I, and this is what I would share with you, that one of the things that was really challenging for me with Joseph and Divine was that we were in all these conversations, but we didn't have our things done, right? It's like we're recommending that people look at this and that and get this paperwork filled out and get this notarized, but we hadn't done it. And so for on my mother's 66th birthday this past year in November, my husband and I got a notary to come. We got our power of attorney, our medical power of attorney, and our living will taken care of. We just went through all the paperwork. It did not take that much time. I repeat, it does not take that much time. But only because we had been in conversations about it. We had thought about it. We knew who would have our children if something would have happened to both of us. We had so many talks that when we sat down to look at what the questions were, it was easy for us to fill out. And then we invited all the people who are in our medical proxy, in our living will, in our power of attorney documents. We invited all those people together. So in the same way that you would invite the most important people to you for your wedding, or your very favorite friends for your 40th birthday party, we invited those people together and shared with them what these documents said. And I believe that's a different and another kind of rite of passage that I believe everyone should take on. If we all get it. We know, like, graduations are rite of passage. We know that certain milestone birthdays are rites of passage. Marriages, sometimes divorces, having a new baby. We want this moment to be another that everyone adds. Add this conversation with the most important people to you about what it is that you want to have happen when you go. And gave ourselves, my husband and I gave ourselves a challenge of seeing to those who are in that cipher, those who are in the place, in the experience with us, to have theirs done. So that's our goal, is that all of those people who were there also have their paperwork complete. People don't really talk about this, and it's like one of these things where until it happens to you, you don't know. There's a lot. You can look up all kinds of YouTube clips and whatnot around, what's going to happen when I have a baby, right? Oh, what's going to happen? And then they tell you everyone's experience is different. But this particular thing, when someone passes, we're all going to live to see someone die. right? And that the things that need to be answered, most of us can answer those questions. Like, what do I want to happen with my body? You know, if I can't speak for myself, if I'm in some type of accident where I can't speak, who do I want to speak for me in terms of my medical well-being, right? These are things we can answer. You know, the once-in-a-lifetime kinds of things. When I went into the bank to handle my parents' banking stuff, I had the gentleman who was helping me. He says, well, unfortunately, ma'am, you can't do this for your mom. Your dad's going to have to be the one. And I was like, well, unfortunately, he died with her. His response was, that's so beautiful.
That was mine, too. That was mine, too.
You know, because I hadn't taken the time to think of it from that perspective. A lot of married people would rather go with their mate. Don't want to live without the person that they've made a life with. And so, you know, but those kinds of things, with them come all kinds of other questions that need to be answered. There's a whole world of things that you wouldn't necessarily plan for, but for the majority of things that are going to need to happen when someone dies, we can answer those questions.
Right. And so this is the service that you guys provide, right, for folks being able to answer those questions of what to do kind of, through that process. Okay. That's beautiful.
That's right.
And as you said, there is so much. And I just want to touch briefly on one of the things after coming to one of the workshops that I got to do for myself was I didn't have a will. And I think there was a conversation. You mentioned that your aunt had said it too. She's like, I don't have much, but I have a will. And I think that sometimes we're often can be in that conversation, right, about like, oh, if I don't have, what does that look like? So when I say I don't have, if I don't have lots of money in the bank or I don't have, you know, a great life insurance policy, then therefore there's nothing else that could be done. But that's further from the truth because some of the things that you just described are things about what about if I am, you know, in a coma or I can't speak, or how do I want my funeral to look? What does that look like? And some of the things that people don't even think about in terms of what will I wear? Like, how would it be dressed? And I was just going through that, and I was like, people don't think about that, but that is like actually could be a hardship to the family that's currently because they want you to look your best, but they're like, well, did she like that? You know, would this suit her well? And it's like no one knows better than you. So those are the things that we get to focus on and get in order. And so after having that conversation, I went, and because I didn't have a will at the time because I was thinking, well, I just have life insurance and it's, you know, divided into this. But I was like, girl, you got a whole, like, teenage at the time. It was like she wasn't quite a teenage yet. Child. Well, if something happened to you, who's going to look after her? What does that look like? And it was that prompted a conversation with my daughter because in my mind, I'm like, oh, you know, my older daughters will take care of her. And then I realized that I didn't even have a conversation with them. How am I going to give them a whole child without even conferring with them, like talking to them if that's something that they would want? Doesn't mean that they would love their sister any less, but like, do they feel like that's something that they feel like capable of doing, would want to do? And my oldest daughter was like, well, what about her dad? Right? And so, like, and then I had to have that conversation with myself, like, well, why would I not think of him? Right? So there's a lot of stuff that you get to unpack, and I know why I didn't think of him initially, but like where I am today actually has me think differently. But the fact that we had the conversation had me begin to unpack those things. And so I think that the work that you guys are doing is wonderful. My goal, at least for the people in my immediate family and people that I come in contact with, is to begin to have these conversations that we deem to be taboo about death and to talk about it. I think that they're important and they're necessary. And I love the fact that you said it's like a rite of passage. It could be like serve as a rite of passage to have these conversations, and we get to celebrate. You know, we get to be it serves an opportunity. It can serve as an opportunity to really celebrate the person, as opposed to being bogged down by all of these other things, right? That seems to be when you look back at it, it's the minutia of it all, right? The clothes, the casket, the cremation. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And I was like, I don't want my children to be able to have to think about all of that. So, like, get your your affairs in order, if you will, or orders in, what is it? Get
your affairs in order.
Yeah. And so is there a website for people to go to in relation to this service, or?
Yes. So After.Community is where you can go, After.Community, and there are a number of products now that we have. So it started with like this deck of cards that have all the questions, the series of questions that you need to be able to answer or want to be able to answer, that can help you just go right from this deck of cards to filling out a medical power of attorney or a living will. But then there's also a board game that has been created where you would invite, you can play the game with your mate or your children or your best friends, and it sort of does something similar, except it also looks at your life, so it enables you to think about, share some really valuable memories that you may want someone to know about you, that you may not have ever considered to be important to share. And then there are also books that you can purchase that are prompts to have you start thinking about this, because some people, if you've never thought about any of this before, then some people feel stuck. So there's a book that just allows you to just do some of the mining of your heart and your spirit to come to some resolution around some of these things, and all of that you can find on the site. So After.Community, and we're in the process now of creating content. I actually have a meeting tomorrow with Divine so that, a lot of people, unless something is in your face, you don't think about it. We don't want people to keep seeing, someone dies in a helicopter crash, children found, floating in a, like these horrible stories on the news are, at this point, when we stop for a moment to think about it, and we don't want that to be the case. We want to be able to put content out there that are like small nudges for us to get our things taken care of. So that's the next step for After is, creating visual stimulation to have people get inspired to sit down and take care of things.
What I experienced at being at the workshop, it wasn't definitely, for me, it wasn't this morbid conversation, right? Because when people think of that, it wasn't. It was really, like, I left feeling empowered, feeling encouraged, feeling excited. Not that I was looking forward to dying, but like I was excited that when the time comes that I'll have the things in order, and that my children will know that when they bury me, that they would do so in honoring, and it would be the things that I wanted. And so that was like, I'm like, well, that's beautiful, right? Just to be able to celebrate. And so we had, small conversations about that. Not enough, and not that we want to have to talk about it all the time, but I think it helps me talk about everything else. And so I didn't leave it feeling like, oh my goodness. I really left it feeling kind of a sense of ownership and responsibility and honor, and a gift, really, that it was for me to be able to give this to my loved ones that I would leave behind. I think that is what I tell people. It is one of the most underrated blessings you can give people that you love. People don't think about this, but this is like an ultimate sign of love and gratitude. I don't know how many people watch Power, but in one of the last episodes, there is, we all know that, like, the main character at some point, is going through this kind of thing, and his attorney has to explain to the family, what he set up. And it's like, it's this moment where you realize, like, he really thought about this. He really considered what he wanted for his family in the event of his death. And in some instances, people felt slighted,
But in others, you could tell what his commitments were. And, I feel like those kinds of small pieces in popular culture are the opportunities. Nipsey Hussle talked about his trust. He talked about what he wanted to have happen. Like, I've set my family up when it's time for me to go. So we have these little glimpses in popular culture, but I don't want it to be as sort of under the radar. I really want these to be more conversations that we're having more often, knowing that it does impact how you live, right? If you have figured out how you want to go, it really, really does shift the way you live your life. My husband and I breathe so much easier knowing that we have done the work that we need to do for our daughters in the event that we leave early. And so, that's what I want for people. I want people to know that when it's their time, that they have done the work to have their families mourn their passing, but also be able to celebrate their lives. So it is a true blessing. I constantly am sending gratitude to my parents as ancestors for this, putting this, not that they, we have no idea what happened in the cosmos and what kind of contracts we made with the Most High before we got here, but I know that through their passing, so many other people will not have to experience what my family experienced with their death. And for that, I think, that they could never know that would be the result of their passing, but it has, that so many people get to be in this conversation as a result.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for that. And I feel like, I am a practicing Buddhist, and so generally when I'm sitting down to chant, there's a moment where we ring the bell for those who have passed. And I just think as we transition to the next part of the conversation, briefly, I want to be able to do that. So we'll just have a moment for our ancestors, for all those who have passed, and for the beautiful conversation that we just had, in hopes that people will see it as a gift, as a blessing, as a responsibility to those that they leave behind. So I'm just going to ring the bell for all those that have gone on. Thank you for that. So with that being said, right, we get to move on, and part of the after is what we get to live and the life that we get to create. And so you said some time ago that your life has taken on a shift in the last 6 to 8 months, I believe that you said, and now you're doing something different, a totally different. And again, as I started to say at the top, this is about reinventing oneself, uncovering, rediscovering, and using all of our creative endeavors and stepping into that. So please, I know that people can't wait to hear about this, because I know I can't wait to hear about this. You are currently working on with a team with Netflix to create docuseries. I don't know how much you can talk about it, but I want to know, how did that come to pass? How did that come to be? And what exactly are you working on with Netflix?
Well, I always tell people one of my first Christmas gifts that I ever got to ask for was a word processor. This was this was a time before some can imagine, when between typewriters and computers we have word processors. And so at 5 years old, I was writing. I did so much writing that my mom was like, okay, let's get her a typewriter. And so I've always been a writer, and I have been ghostwriting. I mean, I've helped people write bios and web content, and have written articles and been in books, and so many different things. And before this whole experience with my parents, I had already started taking filmmaking classes. I was taking classes online, and then every once in a while I would take classes at an ISP, or New York is perfect for if you want to dibble and dabble in filmmaking. And so I was taking classes here and there, but my organization unfortunately had to downsize, and a lot of people lost their jobs. And, herein lies the gift and the challenge of losing people that you love. But my parents, they had insurance. And it was because my parents had insurance that me losing my job didn't mean that I was going to end up, having to make a major shift in my lifestyle. So I was able to, and I know that my mother is so proud somewhere that her making the decision to have insurance means that I could pursue my dream. So I was able to leave my job in June and immediately go to writers' retreats and whatnot. But in this process, I want to say in the days, in the months following losing my job, I had a friend of mine come to me, and she's like, I'm about to work on this Netflix project, and I would love for you to join me in this and doing it. And it's only because I wasn't quiet about the fact that I wanted to move into filmmaking. I've definitely shared with those closest to me, and they saw me putting in the work. They saw me taking the classes. They saw me, exploring the industry. And so I got to come on to do research and to help craft story for this Netflix series that's coming. And what I'll say about it is it's an opportunity to look at what it means to be a Black woman in this country through the lens of women MCs. So that I can say that and not totally give everything away, but we are now, Netflix is known for wanting people to binge. And this particular series, I know people will want to do that because we are, as much as we as Black women know that there's so many stories. We have so many stories that are not getting explored. This particular series is, just a drop in the bucket to start putting ourselves on, having ourselves on screen in really beautiful, honest, authentic ways. But that particular project, when I started working on that particular project, I was also writing my own projects. And so it was, okay, I get a chance to be in this behemoth of a company and sort of see how these things work, how producers go about bringing these stories to life, and had been writing and turned and so last month, January, we're in February, in January I shot 2 films that one will be shown at the Schomburg on the 28th about Sarita Gates, who is an archivist, and most of her work is centered on hip-hop history. And the short Young Schomburg is about her journey to learn more about hip-hop journalism and that history, and her goal to digitize hip-hop history. And then another short that I did called Through the Wire, about a young music producer who gets a call back in 2005 that Kanye wants to sign him. And it's just his time in his studio after getting this call, and how, when you get the best news of your life, who do you call? And how does that information get spread when you get the good news? And so those 2 projects that I've been working on over the last couple months, and on and on. There's a feature that I'm going to be submitting soon, and it was like this avalanche of creativity. It's like when someone that you love dies suddenly, you really start asking yourself, like, okay, so is the last thing I'm gonna do organize a conference call? Before that it was important. Right. I was doing important work, but or the mission was important, but my day-to-day experience had become very humdrum, very corporate before their passing. So now I'm getting an opportunity to return to my 5-year-old roots and sit and type and use my imagination.
I love that. Oh my goodness, I love that on so many levels. So let's just go back to February 28th. Did you say that was at the Schomburg?
Yes, February 28th.
Is it open for the general public?
It's open to the public. Yeah. Mhm.
Yes. Well,
yeah, it's a conversation about archiving hip hop history.
That's awesome. Well, I'll be in the building. So first of all, I'm a hip hop lover and all of that stuff too. And February 27th is my birthday, so I'll be celebrating that day. Yay, 27. But the next day, I didn't have anything planned. Like that day was open, so looks like I'll be at the Schomburg.
At the Schomburg,
so that's going to be fantastic. And congratulations on all the other screenplays and things that you're working on. I think that's brilliant. It has me think about, as you said, it has me think about like how life isn't linear, and that different things will begin to open up for us or blossom from us. As one thing occurs, and this gets created. As something else happens, this gets created. But just what really came to mind was kind of really legacy, I think, is what I ultimately hear you say without having said the word. Do I want to keep making these conference calls? Important work, but like setting up conference calls, important work, but like, what's the legacy that I want to leave behind ultimately? And what does that look like? And as women of all ages, and men too, listen to Just Bloom, the podcast. It's really about amplifying our voices and being able to share our story, and the importance of the stories, as you're doing with the Netflix documentaries, like the importance of the story, no matter how big or how not so big. And I don't mean to diminish anything, but I think often sometimes people think like, I have to be doing something such on a global scale, something so big, and then it will stop us because we're like, what I'm doing isn't enough. And I say, if you're working on yourself, that's enough. If you are connecting with your neighbor, that's enough. Or if you are making the difference in your home, like that's enough, because everyone has different a different outlook on what they want to kind of contribute to this world. But whatever it is a gift and it is a blessing. So no matter how big or bigger. Yeah.
Oh yeah. This work, I one of the things that I'm reminded is like, my mother was a childhood development consultant, but then she was a cosmetologist also, and so. And even though she retired, like she was a childhood development consultant, she went into social work because she loves children and she wanted to serve in that way. But my mom was still doing like Miss Mosley's hair, and would take her tools to Miss Mosley's house to do her hair so that they can talk and kiki about life. And those were very special moments between those two women, right? And so as long as my mom lived, she was not going to give up her shears. She was not going to stop cutting hair for my great aunt or her homegirl from back in the day. Those were the moments people talked about, right? They talked about how my mom would stop everything and come and do hair, and that's a life well lived, right? When what you have left are these memories of caring for people and loving on people. As amazing as of a basketball player as Kobe Bryant was, what people talked most about was those conversations that they had with, for those that knew him. They would talk about the last time they spoke to him, the last thing they remember him saying to them. And so, excuse me, to me, I could do a movie or win awards and all these things, but if the crew on my productions remember me as a monster, then what good was the art, right? And so, I want to just, double click on what you said, because sometimes we look around and we look at what other people are doing. I know I have been guilty of it, and I'm like, oh my goodness, look at Ava Doesn't Stop, or Issa Rae's got a new thing coming out, and I'm sitting here looking at a script. And, it's easy to get sucked into that vortex, but it is so important that we remember that it is about the ways that we leave people, the conversations that we have, the way that we feel about ourselves. Those things that's what gets spread in the ether. It's that those little things.
Yes. as you said, that I'm thinking about. And so for all, for, again, as I said, my sister who recently lost her best friend, Keisha, she has 7 children that she's left behind, and obviously other family members. But what she's most known for is how she opened up her home and her heart, like even with 7 children, her home and her heart for those, and how she would feed anybody that needs feeding or support anyone that needs supporting, or always shared an encouraging word with anyone who needs an encouraging word. That is what's going to live on. Or when I think about my godson, who for the short life that he has led during his life in this world, those who have came in contact was always talking about the good heart that he had, and how he really took moments and stopped and saw you. And I think that that's important, as you share with about your mom, like those connections are valuable connections, and so yes. We can do the really great, big work, and I think we should and we get to aspire to those things, because, like you said, I know that I do. I want to touch, thousands and millions of women, and part of this podcast. But really, the gift that I think we both have is the ability to be able to connect kind of one-on-one or in groups, or how we are sharing ourselves in love and living life on purpose, for purpose, but being loving and generous of spirit as we go along this journey of life. So thank you for that. Wow, this was a beautiful, blossoming conversation again, and I am grateful. In this moment, is there any kind of parting words or things that you want to share?
I think we forget that we are as much a part of nature as any tree, plant, rock, river, stream. And the idea, these other natural beings are not resistant to their calling, right? They're not resistant to the sunlight, or, they welcome that which they're here to do. And I just want to encourage people. I believe that we are here. My grandfather used to always say, until I go, I'm going to grow. And so we have this opportunity to continue to grow and to blossom, and to experience something new that is available to us as we're living. And so I just want to encourage people, although sometimes it feels it may seem like it's going to be difficult or hard or uncomfortable to step into the next greatest version of ourselves. That's where the gift, that's where the juice is, that's where the beauty lies. It's in you allowing yourself the gift of your own evolution. And so, take this conversation and in any Next Bloom podcast that you listen to, and allow it to work on you. Take the gifts that are here for you, and I just encourage you to find the seed that could be planted in you and grow. So I feel really blessed and privileged to be in this conversation with you, Kiki. Thank you so much. And for all those that are listening, just have this work on you, have these moments that you took the time to listen to be of service to you and what you have going on in your life.
Ashe to that. Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. I really appreciate you.